It's a pleasure for me to welcome Julien Fuchs. Julien Fuchs works at Lully in École Polytechnique, and Lully is the laboratoire pour l'utilisation des lasers intenses. So Julien Fuchs is a specialist in laser plasma interactions and more particularly in experimental laser plasma interactions. So Julien has been a CNR scientist since 1998. In 1998 he obtained his PhD at Lully, and since he has held positions in the United States in the early 2000s, in San Diego, I believe, and in Nevada, before moving back to France. So now Julien Fuchs is a very active member of the laser plasma community in France, and he has been involved in many collaborations and working on many topics. I think that one essential goal of the laser plasma community and the physics in this community is to try to make progress towards inertial confinement fusion, and Julien has been interested in that, of course, but in recent years he's also been interested in laboratory astrophysics, and in particular in the possibility of using powerful lasers to do some work of interest to astrophysics, and more recently he's been interested in the possibility of coupling magnetic fields with these laser facilities to address problems of interest in MHD astrophysics. And I believe you will, will be speaking about this in your seminar today. And recently I learned that you had been awarded an ERC grant, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And this grant is to study the physics of air process nucleosynthesis using these powerful laser facilities. So again, you will be speaking about this subject.
Yeah, I will just give a little glimpse, because we're just starting.
Okay. And I think that this seminar is very timely because nowadays we are seeing the installation of new laser facilities, especially in France, but also elsewhere in the world. And there will be more coming in the next decade. So I think it's of interest to know what is going on in this field. And I hope and I believe that you will tell us about these laser facilities as well.
Yes.
So thank you very much. And
thank you very much, Martin, for this introduction. So indeed, I work at the Lully lab, and over the last 5 years also I had a collaboration with the Academy of Science in Russia, so some of the work also has been done in this frame. So here, as Martin said, so let's move this mouse away, yes. So here the idea is to see how high power lasers and as I will show you, the lasers nowadays range very broad parameters of both energy, intensity, power, and how we can really take advantage of this very broad range to start to tackle the investigation of phenomena that can be helpful, hopefully, for understanding or improving our understanding of some astrophysical phenomena. So, of course, this is not just my work, this is my group at Lully, a collaboration with the group of Andrea Acciardi at l'ERMA, very strong collaboration with the lab of National Lab of Magnetic Fields in Toulouse, who helped me to couple strong magnetic field that you will see brought really a novel insight in the dynamic of the plasma we study. And also, you probably know the people of the INAF in Palermo who helped us also with modeling, looking at how we can correlate the phenomena that we look in the lab, with young star formation. And other collaborators here abroad. And so all this has been, we have a lot of support from ANR, recently ERC, and also Placapa, where this has been very important for me because that's how I met Andrea Acciardi, and who gave me some idea on, by discussion, on how we can use the phenomena that we experimentally generate in the lab as, and the way we can scale it to astrophysical phenomena. So basically I will first, more generally, because I understand that all this is not necessarily very clear for you, or all this is quite recent, talking about laboratory astrophysics in general and what we can do with lasers in particular. Then I will show you two concrete examples, moving from generality to concrete, point, and especially what I did personally, which was adding a magnetic field and see how using a high power laser produce plasma with magnetic field, we can really improve our understanding of some phenomena related to young stars. And then finally I will touch a few words on what Martin mentioned, this new project that we're starting supported by the ERC. So laboratory astrophysics, so here I refer to you this seminal paper of the 2000 and the book of Paul Drake in Michigan, who has been really a pioneer in this field. So and I would say that a lot of effort, I mean, related to laser really started in the US and notably by scientists at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, where they built early on very high power lasers. But I will show you nowadays that with much more modest lasers, we can also have produce interesting phenomena. So the overall rationale is that the observation, of which I'm not at all a specialist, give us kind of a glimpse or a snapshot of a system. And here, if we can, using scaling down, especially if we can be in the frame of an ideal MHD plasma, so with all the simplification that this implies, if we can reproduce in the lab something over millimeters and nanoseconds and relate that through scaling laws to a phenomena of astrophysical scale, both being ideal MHD, then the advantage of the lab phenomena is that we can run it and rerun it and rerun it as many times as we want, changing some parameters, changing the initial temperature, for example, of the plasma or the strength of the magnetic field. I will show you some example. And thus compare with also the help of models this full time sequence of a phenomenon to the snapshot that we observe. And so can this help us in understanding the underlying dynamic of a snapshot that we observe? That's the rationale of this field that was started then. So, of course, the temporal scale are enormously different, but precisely in the particular case of an ideal MHD plasma, so a perfect conductor and where we can neglect thermal conduction and the viscosity, as detailed also in this seminal paper by Dmitry Ryotov, then we can really do a quantitative scaling. So this is, I would say, one possibility that is interesting, and I will show you a concrete example of a system where we can really do a quantitative scaling of the phenomena. But then, of course, this is just a niche, because you need to be in this particular set of conditions, which, of course, many systems do not fulfill, like all the kinetic systems. So in this case, there is still the interest of just investigate basic fundamental phenomena, where we cannot pretend and we cannot even desire to have scalability. But, for example, codes or the system is so non-linear or the scales are so important that even the best numerical codes nowadays cannot model such a system. So here, for example, the laser, in the capability to develop very high power and very high intensity, can produce easily collisionless plasmas, so, and shocks, for example. So where here the basic physics of the phenomena that are underlying to astrophysical phenomena can be investigated. So let's see now in a more concrete manner the parameter of what we can produce with and the parameters of the lasers. So the laser beam are typically, so I mentioned that there is a very broad range of parameters. And you see the pulse duration, so the duration over which the energy, the photon energy will be concentrated. And by the way, the lasers are, I mean, compared to other technological means to produce plasmas, like for example discharges, Z-pinches, or gas guns, etc. The laser have a particular interest in which the energy density is the highest that we can produce. So this allows really to attain extreme parameter of the plasma that we can generate. So you see that the duration over which we concentrate the pulse is very broad. So the power are also broad, and especially, for example, for very kinetic system, to achieve very short duration and very high power will allow us to produce very high energy individual energy particle. So the intensities with the energy, the photon energy, being typically of the joules or tens of joules, up to, for the National Ignition Facility in the US, the pulse duration is nanosecond and you have megajoule, but it's distributed over many beams. So still the intensity is in this range. And the focal spot is typically of this dimension. So you put a target there. So of course, these intensity are way above the ionization threshold. So you instantaneously transform the surface in a plasma. And so depending if you use a relatively moderate intensity, you will tend to create really a thermal plasma. Or if you use very high intensity, you will produce mostly a very kinetic plasma and through fields, very fast particle of a very broad range. And you can tune the channel. You can produce mostly electrons or ions or neutrons. And so you have it's a tool that has a lot of versatility. Also to mention is so the temperature typically that you can achieve in the thermal plasma can be megakelvin, and the temperature, the pressure that are associated with the compression can reach even terabar. So you see here, I just give you a glimpse of the extremely broad range of parameters that you can cover. So this, for example, has been extremely extremely useful to explore the thermodynamic of like, for example, planetary cores to look at very high pressure, high density states. So, for example, to look at all these states of metallized hydrogen, etc. So, the lasers in a more concrete manner. So, these are the lasers at Lully, at my home lab. So, these are the lasers we have at present. We have two facilities at Lully. So this is the biggest civilian laser actually in France. The biggest laser being at CIE in Bordeaux, the laser megajoule. But this is the academic facility that is the largest in France, and it develops, you see, so typically a kilojoule nanosecond laser, so that will allow to do a significant thermal plasma. And we have also some short pulses. For example, here in this facility, we have like 100 terawatt type of laser. And Martin was mentioning that there is new laser facility coming. And this is in the frame of this French national EQIPEX program, where we got funding for this facility that is called Apollon. And here I just put a CAD drawing of one of the experimental area of this facility. So this facility is based on the Plateau de Saclay and is located in an underground laboratory that was before a linear accelerator. So it has all the shielding. And with this, we aim to reach 10 petawatts. So you see this facility is 100 terawatts. So technologically, we aim to gain 2 decades in the power and so in the possibility of producing very high energy particles. So these lasers, so we talk here about my lab in France. You find them, but in few places. I mean, these are the usual suspects because these facilities, of course, are not cheap. So US, Russia, China, and Japan, that's typically where you need to travel to be able to do this experiment. So I was talking about initially, earlier, the very high pressure that can be developed with these lasers. And I would say that's where really all the first 10 years of laboratory astrophysics with lasers in this area, a lot of effort was concentrated in order to look at the thermodynamics of this so-called warm dense matter at normal density or compressed and high temperature, and to look at the thermodynamic of the planetary core. So a lot of work has been done really in this area, and I think was really successful. So what when I started later my research activity, I wondered what we could do more originally. And my first idea was to try to couple these plasmas developed with laser with external magnetic field, because I mean we know there is this famous diagram here that shows that this magnetic field exists at all these scales, and there is this kind of self-scaling here of the magnetic field with the system size. And the magnetic field is obviously, I mean, you're the astrophysicist and I'm not, but plays usually a very essential role in the dynamic of this system. So I went to see the National Magnetic Field Lab in Toulouse in France, who are experts in producing high-strength magnetic field, and I will show you later on through the scaling why we need high strength. Because if you use like permanent magnet, the maximum magnetic field strength you can develop is 1 Tesla, and this is not enough when you look at the scalability. You need to reach at least 20 Tesla or so. And this is not easy, but they could do this through a Helmholtz type coil that is pulsed. So we send like 20 kiloampere in that. And of course, there is a lot of development in the material so that it doesn't explode in your face. And we put that in the center of a target chamber, you see. So typically, this is like this size, 2 meters, this target chamber. You have all the delicate and fragile optic of the laser that are around. You put tubes in this assembly so that, of course, this chamber is in vacuum, because the laser, when you focus it down, you need to be in vacuum. Otherwise, you would just ionize the air and create a plasma before you reach your target. So the unwanted plasma and not the one you want. You put your target inside. So now this is like just a CAD view. You have your laser shining, generating here the plasma. And you put this high-strength magnetic field, and then you have some diagnostic. So why do we do that? I will first show the concrete work we did on trying to understand the influence of a poloidal magnetic field on a hemispherically ejected plasma, and in the production, the ability to, with this setup, to produce very nice collimated jets. So this is a picture I took from this paper here, giving like the various scale of between the Klepperian disk, the pseudo disk, and then the overall large-scale region with this global magnetic field that exists here, and that is sometimes observed to be aligned with the axis of the Klepperian disk, and sometimes not. I mean, this is a beautiful Hubble Space Telescope image showing indeed a very nice jet that is emitted from this object. And when I discussed with colleagues, I mean, who are astrophysicists, one point apparently that was still not very clear was the role of the magnetic field in the formation of this jet, and especially the very nice long-range collimation here, and the relation between precisely the orientation, as discussed, for example, in this paper, between the field and the jet in the possibility for this jet to be sustained over very long range. So the jet typically, so the model that was developed, I think the seminal work of Blandford and Payne here in the 80s was that the matter that is initially ejected to conserve the kinetic momentum of the matter falling on the star. So this is a 3D MHD simulation. the matter is initially confined by the toroidal magnetic field that is induced by the differential rotation velocity here of the matter. And indeed, you see in this 3D MHD simulation that the matter starts to be indeed confined by this threaded magnetic field. But this configuration is unstable, and this has been beautifully demonstrated by a set of experiments performed at Imperial College in the first decade of the 2000s. And here they used the Z-pinch. So this is a wire here that was where there was there was a set of wire here, and there was a toroidal magnetic field produced, an ejecta here that was hemispherical. So really something exactly in this configuration they try to produce. You have a broad plasma that is ejected, and you have a toroidal magnetic field. And beautifully, they show that indeed you get this kink instability and a very strong disruption of the jet. So clearly, this model is good at the base in order to start to confine the plasma, but over very long range, it's not able to, purely the toroidal magnetic field, to give a very nice and collimated jet like we see here. So we set ourselves the goal of studying, again, generating a broad and hemispherical plasma, this time by a laser, and looking at the influence, this time, of a strong poloidal magnetic field. So I was talking about scalings earlier, so again, in this paper. So between the laser plasma that we produce here and the young stellar object, we can see that although these dimensionless parameters are sometimes, you see, extremely different, what counts is, in fact, if these numbers are above or below 1, I mean significantly. And for example, for the Reynolds number, the fact that you are in the tens of thousands already ensure that indeed the viscosity is negligible. So both are indeed ideal MHD plasma in this case, and the scalability. So for the time, typically 20 nanoseconds in the lab will be equivalent to 6 years in space. 1 millimeter will be of the scale of 300 astronomical units. And you see that's the point, is that the millitesla that is inferred from spectroscopic measurement, from my understanding, in the vicinity of the star, here requires to be equivalent to 20 Tesla. So we really need to achieve very strong field in order to be relevant. So this is an experimental image of the plasma. So you have a laser that comes, and this is a typical blow-off plasma produced by, you arrive with your laser, you generate a hot plasma at the surface, and due to its internal pressure and energy, it will just expand in space. And when we added the poloidal magnetic field here, you see in this sequence of time here, so you see these scales in nanoseconds, and remember that 20 nanoseconds is equivalent to 6 years. So here, typically in this case. And you see that the poloidal magnetic field has this very spectacular effect. You see the scale here, this is 7 millimeters, so it will be like here. And you see here we have the ability, here we are below the detection threshold of our diagnostic. We have the ability to see this very nice collimated jet with quite constant density. You see this is a line out here. And so we keep a constant radius and constant density over, we stop the observation here because our magnetic field has only a limited spatial range. So basically over all the distance that we observe. So we looked at the phenomena that is behind it, and it's really due to the fact that, initially you have this magnetic field that is everywhere. Initially, in the plasma at the base will have a pressure high enough to push the magnetic field lines that are frozen in, until you reach a point where the beta of the plasma, so the ratio of the plasma pressure over the magnetic pressure, will reach 1. So you will compress the magnetic field until a point where it will counterbalance the plasma. So you will have an accumulation of plasma and a shock here that is created with a higher density, and this shock will redirect the plasma flow here along this cavity. And you have this redirection of an initially hemispherical flow into something that is extremely narrow and collimated. So this, we detailed this model in this paper here. So this was quite satisfying. And then due to the time, I'm not going to show it, but then we did other experiments where instead of putting a magnetic field completely aligned here, we varied the direction of the magnetic field, and we saw that we had the possibility still to confine the plasma in a jet until an angle, so it's not like a 1-0, but progressively we see the disruption of the jet until typically 20-25 degrees. And this is interesting because I told you about this study here, this paper by Ménard and Duchesne, where they did a statistical survey of young stars and looking at the direction of this global magnetic field and the possibility of jets to be collimated out of this star. And they obtained the same result in the end, is that if this angle is too large, no collimated long-range jet is observed, which correlates well with what we see in the experiment. So this seems to be a good candidate to explain this. Then I'm going to show you a second concrete example of what we can do in the lab, this time related to accretion of matter on young stars. So this is just a cartoon, and this is I mean, a bit more better picture extracted from this paper. So the ideal configuration, or I would say simplistic configuration, is the one of the dipole magnetic field, with matter being wound up in the magnetic field line and falling near the poles of the star in the form of this accretion column that land onto the star. So, of course, this is just a cartoon, because nowadays, even with the best resolution telescope, we cannot reach this resolution, so we cannot see this phenomenon. Basically, the astronomers right now analyze this phenomena through the radiation that are generated when the matter lands on the star, and by the transfer of kinetic energy when it's gravitationally accelerated and lands on the star in thermal energy. So you create this very hot plasma that will radiate in the X-rays. And that's in their model how they analyze and notably the matter accretion rate. So the measurement don't have this, the spatial resolution. They just see globally the X-rays that are generated from the impact. So one question open is, what is really the structure of the accretion region? Because basically, if now I take a zoom of that region, a simplistic view would be to have this column of matter that is collimated by the magnetic field that lands here. You will have a shock at the surface and a reverse shock that develops here. But what they observe actually, from my understanding, is that the X-ray luminosity that they obtained from observation is actually lower than what they predict from the dynamic of the system and the amount of matter that should arrive in the star at a given stage. So actually the observer pointed the fact that there is possibly absorption of the X-ray generated here at the hot impact region up to the observer that is located, of course, very far from there. And then they were curious to see if in the lab we could indeed produce this kind of configuration in order to see in the lab what could happen, and that could explain this point. So what we did is that actually we took the jet that we were forming earlier and we made it impact a surface, an obstacle, And it's really, so then a kind of ideal situation here. We have a very collimated jet that is aligned with a magnetic field. We keep the magnetic field unto the obstacle location to be like on the star surface. And then we will observe what is happening here. So this is a sequence of images obtained on different shots. So this is an experimental picture. This is not a simulation. And you see the sequence of time running. The first time the jet is actually exactly impacting the surface. So the magnetic field is everywhere here. And you see, so two phenomena, well, a series of phenomena. So clearly we have a reverse shock that is progressing upward here. We have matter that is flowing on the surface, along the surface initially, but that is very quickly recollimated. You see this shape here. So the matter doesn't flow far laterally, it's recollimated. And so in the end, what we observe is that we have a cocoon here, or a shell of matter that is surrounding this accretion column. And this was very interesting for the people in Palermo we worked with who were modeling this kind of phenomena, because indeed this shell, the presence of this shell here was one scaled to the astrophysical phenomenon. For them was a satisfying answer to this open question of why is the X-ray that should be generated in this shocked region be in fact observed of having a lower flux than from outside than what is expected from the energy balance here, because this shell has indeed absorptive X-ray capabilities. So here I'm going to show you an example of a simulation that was performed with this 2D code. Here you get density and temperature in the two-half map of the same simulation. And you see that, I mean, the analogy is quite satisfying between what we observe in the lab and what is modeled here in this code, with the matter here flowing laterally, but again, the same phenomenon. You have the magnetic field that gets compressed until you reach a balance point of pressure, and then the matter is just redirected here and creates this shell here that has the capability to partially shield this impact point. And so, in fact, when you look at it from the Earth, indeed, the flux of X-rays that you will get is distorted compared to the property of really the matter at the impact point. So in the 5 minutes that I have remaining, I will show you. So here I talked mostly about, I would say, moderate intensity plasmas that generate thermal plasmas and in a frame of close to ideal MHD plasmas, and the fact that we can get some quantitative scaling with astrophysical phenomena. Here I'm going to touch about a completely different domain where we exploit much higher energy particle. And the idea, this is the project I proposed and that was just now accepted at the ERC. The idea is, can we, with laser, bring some original insight on the understanding of nucleosynthesis and mostly the R process. So this is the well-known chart of nuclei. So in yellow, you have this valley of stability where all the known elements are located here with number of protons and number of neutrons. So the formation of all the elements that are in this bottom part of the table of elements is well known. Up to iron, this proceeds by fusion reactions in stars. Then above the iron, where we have the most stable element with respect to fusion, what is postulated is that this S process, so S for slow, takes place, And this S process so is illustrated here in this table. This S process so also happens in star, where you take a heavy element, using the neutrons that are produced in the fusion reaction, you have, with some probability, absorption by the already existing heavy atom of a neutron. Then later on you have a beta decay that helps you move left here in this chart. And then you reabsorb a neutron after some time, and over millions of years in stars, that's why it's called a slow process, you progressively create element and populate here this part of the chart. But the problem is that this stops at the bismuth, so the element with atomic mass around 200. Why? Because at the bismuth, if you absorb a neutron and you create the next element, the polonium, which was infamously publicized in recent UK-Russia diplomatic problem or spy problem, we know that the polonium is extremely radioactive, and in fact the polonium decays through beta decay too fast for the probability with the neutron flux that exists in star to be stable enough so that it can reabsorb a neutron and progress like that on the chart. So basically when you reach the bismuth, it recycles quite fast down, and you can never reach, it's a kind of ceiling, and you can never reach a heavier element. So the question was, we observe on Earth that there are all these elements, gold, silver, uranium, whatever. So they exist, obviously. How were they processed? So there was this paper in the 50s by 4 American theorists who proposed this air process that is illustrated here, where basically you will have the simultaneous absorption of many neutrons at once in order to progress very fastly here in the number of neutrons. So that's why you see all this green zone here. So you will have a fast absorption of many neutrons, and then later on some beta decay, and again some fast absorption, and then progressively you will fall down on this valley of stability, but having passed this ceiling of the bismuth. So the problem for this is that then you need much higher neutron flux than in the stars in order to have statistically the possibility to absorb many neutrons. So what I proposed, so let's go and see, okay. So what I proposed is basically to do in the lab this to reach a neutron flux that could be enough in order to process indeed simultaneous neutron capture. So I'm going to mention that this is not just a purely theoretical idea that was never confronted to reality. There was indeed an experimental test. So it was in fact in the very first H-bomb explosion by the Americans in the Pacific. They added, so they controlled very much the purity of all the material that they put in the bomb, and they added some mid-heavy element in there in order to test later on the ground what very heavy element they could produce. And 10 years after the explosion, they actually released or declassified the data and published a paper that showed that they could actually perform 10 simultaneous neutron absorption. So this was indeed possible, but since it could not be reproduced apart from a nuclear bomb where you cannot really test what is going on, in fact, all the neutron capture rate or the decay rate of the elements that are produced are unknown up to now. So the idea, simply, this is, it's going to be a difficult task, but the idea is with lasers, using a spallation process to produce neutron, can we produce a high enough neutron flux and expose it to a plasma or heavy element in order to be able in the lab in a controlled way to measure what we produce? So this is what the scheme that I propose to be developed. So we will need very high intensity lasers. Why? so because we need to produce very high energy proton, and I mentioned that this is not what we do up to now. So typically what we do up to now is 0.1 GeV, so 100 MeV of proton is the maximum that we can produce with lasers. But we expect that with the next generation laser that we are building, and we should do the first shot at the beginning of the year on the Plateau de Saclay, we expect with the scaling that we will crank up the energy of the proton. Then we have techniques, this we developed already, to transport the proton from the source until a spallation target. And the idea of transporting is because here all this creates a very noisy environment with also tons of X-ray, gamma, etc. And you want to separate the stages. And once you arrive with this high energy proton here on a heavy element, using spallation, so it's a very well-known process in nuclear physics where you enter with a high energy proton into a high Z nucleus like lead, for example. You have a process of cascade and evaporation that can, I mean, the ratio of neutron versus proton is highly dependent on the kinetic energy of the proton that you slam in that target. But precisely, you can get a very efficient process. At this energy, typically, you can do up to like 5 neutrons per incident proton. So you could take advantage of the fact that, and this is the crucial point here, with these lasers, not only we can do high energy, but we can do a very high number of protons in a bunch. Because again, the laser concentrates a lot of energy in a small surface and a small time. And this is many orders of magnitude compared to what accelerators can do. So the number of protons in the bunch is very short, very high. And we can then get, hopefully, a crazy enough neutron flux so that we can reach, this is postulated in theoretical paper to be enough to reach the R process threshold. So I'm just going to give you a table. So this is the existing best neutron source. This is the ELL reactor based in Strasbourg, and this is the SNS at Oak Ridge in the Tennessee, in the US. This is accelerator based. This is a reactor, so of course it's continuous. And you see the fluxes are, of course, this is important. This is a fission reactor. The SNS, so it's completely different. It's an accelerator based with spallation. So you produce over a kilometer-long accelerator 1 GeV proton that you slam indeed in a lead target. And with spallation, you produce these neutrons. So it has a high repetition rate, but you see the neutron bunch duration, because the accelerators are space charge limited, so you cannot cram more proton into your bunch, otherwise they will just explode while transported in the accelerator. And you see this is kind of the best neutron flux that you can achieve. Already, I mean, that we've been demonstrating in experiments, already with laser we can do better in terms of peak flux. And also you see the bunch duration is much better than what they can do. But right now our facilities, the technology that we used, which was the technologies from the 80s, is a very low repetition rate. So our average neutron flux is low. Now with the new lasers that we are building, not only they have higher intensity, higher power, but also you see we increase a lot the repetition rate by a change of technology of the laser. So we hope to reach this crazy peak neutron flux where we could do a rapid process and also have a much better average flux, even coming close to these facilities, which this is the scale of billions of dollars, this facility. And here, these lasers that we are building, I mean, it's the typical budget of this laser is big. It's like 50 million, but it is nothing in comparison to this. Then, of course, there is the laser fusion, but this is like a really unique facility that is aimed to produce a large amount of neutron by generating this fusion. So this is typically the experiment that we would plan or like to do in this frame, having this extreme neutron flux and expose a plasma with heavy element and look at the neutron absorption rate and recycle, thanks to the high repetition rate we have already a material that is high Z, generate some radioactive element and take advantage of the repetition rate to re-expose with neutron enough to compensate the decay, the radioactive decay, so that we can process through multiple neutron capture. So I'm going to the end. Sorry, I did a little bit more than my time. So I think, I hope I showed you, gave you a sense of what we can do in terms of that the lasers can cover. Here, this is just a summary diagram to show that the laser plasma can cover really a very wide range of energy density of the plasmas. So up to now, the plasmas have been unmagnetized. Now with the magnetization, we can also cover a very large range of the beta parameter here, that for which we can touch a lot of systems here. So I showed you that we can do in the limit of the assumption or the simplification that entails an ideal plasma. We can do quantitative study that help the observations to correlate, to understand the dynamic of the system. But then I think this is really just starting, and we see that even for non-scalable phenomena, mostly like kinetic, collisionless, we can, I think, really do a lot, especially thanks to the laser technology that is progressing extremely fast and that can allow us to reach new regime and enlarge here this zone quite quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julien. Do we have questions?
I hope it was not too obscure.
The density that you showed at the end, 5 by 1024 neutrons.
Yeah.
This is very interesting because this is roughly the density that you need to explain the GRB, which was observed after the merger of neutron star, two neutron stars. Yes. However, to make such a GRB, for instance, you need something like a Lorentz factor of roughly 100.
Yes.
And with the 0.5 GeV that you say, it's very, very far.
Yes.
I don't know if there is any possibility that one day we achieve something like that, especially if we can add also some one kilogauss or something like that of a magnetic field. Would be very interesting.
Okay, so I mean there is a lot. It's not the field in which I work, but there is clearly a lot of effort also in the laser plasma communities to go toward very high energy particles, because also here there is the feeling that the technology of accelerator, I mean, we see the pinnacle that has been achieved with the LHC is reaching a kind of technological saturation. I mean, we have this enormous accelerator that has been producing incredible beams, but it's not using this conventional accelerator technology, basically RF cavities powered by microwave, that you're going to increase the energy, the density of particles, etc. So here, the laser plasma has been achieving, I would say, over the last 10 years, some really amazing progress in terms of mastering the physics of acceleration of particles. Nowadays, in terms of electron, they can produce routinely in the lab like 10 GeV electron over a millimeter. So a lot of groups, due to the amazing gradient of acceleration that you can produce in a plasma, it's basically a plasma already, so you can go ahead and crank up the gradient and the E field. So a lot of people now are putting an emphasis in order to do stages of acceleration to increase the, but you see already they can produce 10 GeV in 1 millimeter, so I mean, really, the sky is the limit right now. And the laser also themselves are quickly, just to give you a glimpse. So right now, we make these lasers that rely on amplifier. It's like one laser line. The biggest laser we can do is maybe in the near field like that, 20 centimeters, and we focus it. This has maybe a technological limit because you need to produce laser amplifiers that are nice, homogeneous, etc. You will not be able to make them 1 kilometer size. But the idea is now to stack like different laser lines and coherently add them in order to crank up the electric field. And people work today on that. And the idea will be like you take boxes and you just pile them and you produce this like 100 beam, 1000 beam maybe. And compared to accelerators is hyper compact still. For example, the laser Apollon that I'm talking about, to be extremely concrete, to reach 10 petawatt, the full laser fits in this room. So it's impressive the level of progress of technology. Yeah. So here there is really a virtuous circle where technology, so people who really work on the laser technology help us to push ahead the frontier of plasma physics, and we work hand in hand. Yeah.
You mentioned situation where scaling does not fully apply, or maybe does not apply at all.
Yes.
But where you can still get some insight about the physics of the problem or explore parameters which are otherwise impossible to explore. Can you give a few examples of such situations?
So, for example, one thing where I know Martin is working in collaboration with some of my theoretical colleagues is the development of the Weibull instability, for example, in plasmas. So, what they look at is the development of Weibull instabilities in the like explosion of supernovas or this kind of environment. This scale, I mean, or the parameter like the lady was mentioning, the gamma factor, we won't be able tomorrow to reproduce that. But at a reduced scale with lower energy particle, you can still study fundamentally the Weibull instability, look in the lab at its full evolution from the initial stage, the filament development, the coalescence, etc. So this is a concrete example of a collisionless plasma where we can do fundamental investigation.
I was wondering if there is a correlation between the properties of the laser that you use and the heaviest element that you can create with your processes, and whether you can use astrophysical probes like the neutron-star merger to complement what you're finding.
So a correlation, well, in the sense of I don't know really how to answer this question. What we clearly the more the laser will progress, the higher the energy of the particle will be, the higher the bunch density. Typically, the number of proton or neutron that you will be able to produce is given by the energy of your laser you will have. The kinetic energy of the proton that will create the neutron is linked with the intensity or the power that you have. So you need to progress on both fronts. And the more we will progress on that, the more we will be able to increase the neutron density, the more we will increase the probability of multiple neutron capture, and the more we will be able to see heavier elements. That's what I can think of.
Well, so further questions? So if not, let us thank Julien again.
And by the way, since we have this project starting and we are looking to recruit, if you have a good student finishing to send me as postdoc, I would be happy. Thank you very much. I'm looking for postdocs.